to make this connection here on the program because naturally, with great interest, being a big golf fan and liking to bet on golf as well, I was enthralled with what was happening in the U.S. Open this year. And there was a parallel to a story that occurred some 35 years ago as and this turned out to be a good friend of mine over the years. We got to know each other because he also hailed from South Florida, Hollywood's own, as he was known. Mike Donald joins us here on the program. And Mike was part of Cinderella's story that didn't necessarily go Cinderella's way. As we welcome Mike into the show, and he ended up in 1990 finishing second in the U.S. Open, and hopefully we still have Mike here because we just were looking at him, and all of a sudden we have a little bit of a computer glitch. But okay, Mike dropped out here for a second, but I'll go ahead and set the stage here, and hopefully he taps back in. Because yeah, I'm watching J.J. Spaun. He's being described as a journeyman. Now, he had made some inroads this year. J.J. Spaun, who won the 2025 U.S. Open. And you saw what a logjam there was atop the leaderboard. He opened up. He was 4 under the first day. Very few players were under par. They managed to navigate their way through the course with a reasonable amount of success, considering the thickness and the level and degree of difficulty that was presented by the rough. No trees on this course at Oakmont. And you're thinking, well, this should be something that the players just absolutely bring to their knees. As now we do welcome Mike Donald into the program. Michael, I couldn't help but think of this. I'm watching J.J. Spaun on the final day, and he's spiraling out of control there on the front 9. He bogeys 5 of the first 6 holes. Then they have the 2-hour rain delay. The conditions were horrific. He at one point was a couple of shots. I guess he got a shot behind and was just barely hanging in there. 6 or 7 other guys are now in contention. And when he holed that putt, now he didn't need to make the putt, but he needed a 2-putt from 64 feet on the final hole. And I'm thinking, well, when does this happen in golf? It wasn't quite in the same dramatic fashion. I hate to bring this man's name up, Hale Irwin, who hold like a 50-footer, and we have the video. We'll play that later on in the program of him running around a green. And I'm imagining you're probably sick of seeing that. First of all, how are you, my friend? And what did you think? Did you see the parallels there to what was going on when you, with one PGA win, were in a position to win the 1990 U.S. Open?
Yeah, there was definitely parallels, and he certainly didn't have an easy 2-putt. I mean, that was straight downhill with 10 feet of break. He was more apt to 3-putt. I mean, the odds are from 30 feet, you'll 3-putt as often as you'll make it. So for him to make that putt, but it was very interesting because he's 34 years old. I was 34 at the time. He's got 1 tour victory. I had 1 tour victory. But to make that putt, it was absolutely amazing.
Incredible. All right, let's talk about this year's Open first. A little bit of a postscript on that because many guys ended up being in contention, and yet it seemed like they were falling all over themselves. First of all, should they have continued to play after the rain delay? I know they don't want to go to a Monday telecast and lose all of the audience, but it seemed like it was already treacherous the way they had devised the rough. It looked like the only thing that they didn't have off the fairway was a Venus flytrap to just gobble up the ball and make it disappear. And we saw these guys hacking their way through it, and these are great players, and they're barely able to get the ball out of the rough and put it in a trap 30 yards away. What did you think about, first of all, the conditions and the decision to continue play under those circumstances?
Well, I would say that, definitely when it gets wet like that, it actually makes the greens a little bit easier. But when the rough has the water, it really makes it tough to get the ball out of that rough. But what they did was basically standard for every tour event, any tournament you ever play in. Sometimes tour events will go to lift clean in place, but the USGA would never do that. And plus, you can't switch in the middle of the round anyway. But I know they made a big deal out of Sam Burns and the water problem there on 15, but what people don't realize is when you have casual water, the rules basically say the ball has to be sitting in a puddle. It has to be, you have to see water. It has to be standing water. And then when you take your stance, you're allowed to fairly take your stance. You're not allowed to, go up and down and, take a stance, but you take the stance. And then once after you have the stance, there has to be standing water. So it's like it doesn't have to be just because it's wet doesn't mean you get casual water. I learned my lesson playing at the Canadian Open with Mark Hayes, and but it's a rule that a lot of people don't understand. You actually have to have standing water, but in the end, it was fair. What's fair for one was fair for all. And the key for JJ was that 12th hole. He had a poor drive, then he laid it up in the rough. He hacked it out on the green, 40 feet, and he made that one. And that kind of got him back in the game because he was behind at that point. But he made that putt, and then the next hole he made a 20-footer, and all of a sudden he was right in the mix.
That was great. And people were saying that that drive that he hit on 17, where he ended up birding the hole, he got it within eagle range, just missed that, where he now was not only back in contention, but was in a position to sort of take control of the tournament and eventually go on to win it. But that if Tiger Woods had hit that drive, that this would be the stuff of which legends are made. And yet not that many people were talking about that particular shot because obviously it was eclipsed when he hauled a putt from 64 feet on 18 to win it. But Burns thing was interesting to me because all before that, Adam Scott, look, a very likable guy. He had one major tournament win. He's out there at 44 years old, another improbable contender this late in the tournament. But every time he asked for a ruling, that they got him one of those novelty tees that you would get at like south of the border or someplace like that, and let him tee it up in the fairway. And it reminded me of when Matt Kuchar, I think, got screwed out of a British Open when they allowed Jordan Spieth to go from behind a garbage dump and drop his ball in the fairway. I mean, is that a psych out when you call for an official, Mike Donald, and they deny you the opportunity? I mean, he actually went for a second opinion, like I do when I go to the doctor, where the guy says, yeah, you have this problem, you're going to need surgery. And I say, well, I want a second opinion. He says, yeah, and you're ugly too. But is that a mental psych out for a golfer? Because Burns did go on and shank the next couple of shots.
Well, what I would say is, Burns basically was, he had that ball sitting in the short rough, so he was trying to get some relief so he could get it, out of play. That's why he wanted to get it out of that short rough. But it's always an individual thing. It's a mental thing. It depends upon, you try to take advantage of the rules, but when it comes right down to it, you call for a ruling. They come out there, they give you the ruling. And then you got to move on. And so if you get psyched out, then that's your problem. If you get a bad call in a basketball game, if you waste the next 5 minutes worrying about that bad call. And so the real thing is they didn't give you the ruling. Now you got to figure out a way to get to the clubhouse and win this tournament, because you're going to spend the rest of your life saying, boy, you know what? I wish I would have been more, what's the word? I wish I'd have been more in tune with what the results were going to be, as opposed to, letting that affect me in such a way that, for the rest of my life, I may never get another chance at a major like that.
All right, and this leads us to your experience in 1990. I believe it was Medina that you guys were playing, and I didn't realize Hale Irwin was already in the clubhouse, sitting there at -8.
Yeah, he was at -8.
You were on the course, and we're going to roll this video in. And I don't know how painful this is for you to watch. You've probably seen it a few times. As we're going to have Garen drop in this Hale Irwin shot where he ends up, and there he is wearing the red Sanzabelt slacks, which I'm sure he was endorsing. Not exactly. I had some experience with Hale Irwin. I don't know that you would say that he was a bit of a dick, but he seemed to be that way. Well, were you aware that was happening? Because you were, what, 7 or 8 holes, maybe 9 holes behind him at the time?
Yeah, I was on the 10th hole, so I'm 9 holes behind, and he wasn't really in the picture at all. And then, all of a sudden he birdies 5 of the last 8 holes, and so he goes from 3 under to 8 under, and I'm out there, making a bunch of pars. And I really wasn't realizing. I didn't even see that video for about 3 or 4 days later, because back then they didn't have the Golf Channel, and they didn't have the internet, and so I didn't even see it for a while later. But it's interesting because Hale, about 25 years after that, so it would have been like 2010 years ago. He did an interview, and he recalled, he said some disparaging things about me, and I didn't really appreciate it. So I wrote him a letter and delivered it to the locker room in Birmingham, Alabama. He called me up and he said, "Mike, I can't believe the venom you've gotten this letter." But looking back, I wish I hadn't written the letter. But he's always been fairly nice to me. But he he said some disparaging things about me. But anyway, that's life.
What kind of negativity could he possibly have expressed about you? I've known you a long time, and all going all the way back into the early '90s, and I mean, there couldn't be a nicer guy on the planet. And the interesting part of the story is, and one of my favorite lines in a movie, Cinderella Man, which you were a bit of that, and of course had a Cinderella story going there with your lone win being, I think, the year before in the Anheuser-Busch tournament. That you had been knocking on the door and doing well enough, obviously, to grind out a living. But I remember you telling me a while back about the significance of either winning the U.S. Open, which you eventually did go to an 18-hole playoff, which they used to determine and decide and decipher who was going to win when it ended in a dead heat. This was a career changer in a lot of ways for you, because while Hale Irwin already had a couple of U.S. Opens in the bag, uh, this would have meant a 10-year exemption from having to qualify for tournaments. I mean, how much impact did that one stroke differential have on your career?
Well, you know what? For eligibility wise, it really, for 10 years, as it turns out, I played poorly the following year. And then I got my card back in 92, 93. I was exempt, but struggled. And so I would have been exempt through 2010. I mean, to the year 2000. So I would have had another 10 years of 7 years of exemption when things started going bad. And then, it's funny, you go through stages, for a long time, you're like thinking about, you're thinking about that exemption. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I just wish I had my name on the trophy. And then you get to the point where you're like turning 50. And if I'd have won the Open, I would have been exempt for the senior tour. So now I'm not exempt for the senior tour. So then you're like, man, I really wish I'd have won that thing, because it affects you, your eligibility. But as time goes on, you start to realize that, you got to live your life and all that stuff. Your life can go in different directions. For me, the worst part of it was that, so I played such good golf for a 6-week period there, like I'd never played, and I wanted to do it more of it. And there's a famous baseball writer from the Washington Post named Tom Boswell.
Yes.
And then the following year, we were at the U.S. Open, and he came up to me and he said, Mike, I've been watching you for the last year. And he says, you're trying to be somebody you're not. You're trying to be too good. And he says, you're trying to be Greg Norman or Curtis Strange or, and, it was such a high to do what I did that I wanted to do it more, and finishing 25th at the BC Open wasn't good enough for me anymore. And so I was trying to be too good. And he was exactly right. And I'd become friends with Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric. And he sent me a postcard one time, and it just said, Mike, you got to go back to being a grunt. He says, I'm a grunt every day. And his message was the same thing. You just got to go take care of every day. Don't try to be somebody you're not. And Boswell said, Mike, you're just a journeyman pro. That's who you are. Just grind it out. And so, in an effort to, my expectations changed and what I wanted to accomplish changed, and got in my way. And I've seen it happen with other people. Bob May, who lost to Tiger Woods in that PGA. His game disappeared soon after. And Lenny Batiste, who lost in a playoff at the Masters, had a great opportunity to win. And, it just affects you. And you never know how it's going to affect you, but it affects you.
Yeah, the line in the movie, of course, was the Max Baer character talking to James J. Braddock's wife in the film, and he's known as Cinderella Man. And the guy looks at him, looks at her, and says, "People die in fairy tales too, so it's not always the
Yeah.
outcome that you're
You
looking for."
know, I don't want to make it sound like this is some kind of sad story because
Yeah,
now at this point in my life, and I would say in the last 10 or 15 years, I've realized that, and I say this with all honesty, that it actually worked out better for me because if I'd have won, it would have pigeonholed me into being a U.S. Open champion, and I would have had to live that life, and I would have joined some fancy country club, and I've been hanging out, and and your whole identity would become, I'm a U.S. Open champ, and then you're playing golf with wealthy people at clubs, and to be honest with you, the way my life is now, 90% of the people that are most important to me, I would have never even met.
it's
So,
interesting too. And
uh,
you were telling me the story that you were in a bar not long ago, and you're talking to somebody, and you mentioned in that you were a runner-up in the U.S. Open. I don't know if you were watching golf at the time or watching this tournament, but and a guy looks and goes, "Oh, yeah."
yeah,
And, so it's interesting, what a different path that second place finish took you on.
yeah. Well, it takes you on a different path. But you know what? By losing, I think I learned a lot more about life. I learned a lot more about people, and like I said, I've got a lot of people that I wouldn't have met, and a lot of the folks I know live paycheck to paycheck, and you have more empathy, and I don't know. For me, it's enriched my life. So, and quite frankly, having 3 U.S. Opens for Hale takes him to a whole different level than two. So it worked out good for him too.
I still can't watch that video with anything but a sense of disgust and distaste, my friend. But all right, so now you come down the stretch, and what you had a 15-foot putt, I think, on 18 to win
Well,
the
the
tournament.
yeah, well the final round, I had about a 15 footer on 17, but anyway, we ended up tied, play off the next day, and I'm 2 shots up with 3 to go. The hole that really hurt me was number 12. He made number 11. He made a bogey, and I hit a beautiful shot about 20 feet above the hole, and I rolled it down there about oh maybe about 3 feet by, 3.5 feet by, and I missed it. And so instead of picking up a shot there, I was 1 shot ahead. That would have made me 2 shots ahead. And then the next hole, I'm on the green, and he's got a 10 footer for a bogey, and he made it. And I two putted. So I theoretically easily could have been up by 4, but I'm up by 2. And then we both birdied number 14. And then he makes an unbelievable birdie at 16. He hit a 3 iron up there about 8 feet and made it. And 17, I hit it about 10 feet and hit this beautiful putt, rolled right over the top edge with. And then 18, I hit a poor bunker shot. I hit it in the trees and hit it in the bunker and blasted it out. About 15 feet. And I hit a beautiful putt and it rolled right over the right edge. And then we went to the playoff and he birdied the first playoff hole.
All right, take me through the early portion of that day. Mike Donald, as you say, I don't know. I never resent the classification of a guy being a journeyman because you're a professional sports player and a professional athlete, and nothing wrong with being part of that whole category. And people seem to take a disparaging look at. And it seems like a negative term to label a guy a journeyman, like J.J. Spawn was being talked about during the course of the tournament and all 4 days for that matter. You wake up in the morning. They don't have these 18-hole playoffs anymore. The U.S. Open is now decided by a 2-hole aggregate score. I believe what's now called the Open was the British Open is 4 holes. aggregate score. So you're never going to see this again, where two guys have to go, or more if there is a three-way tie. But in this case, two guys are going to have to go out to the first tee and play 18. So, what was your mental approach that day? What were you feeling? I mean, as I said, you're Mike Donald going against a two-time U.S. Open champion who had miraculously worked his way into a position to be in this playoff. Take us through that morning and what it was like lining up for the first shot on the first tee.
Well, I had taken a lesson from somebody in Houston the week before, and I literally was I was hitting the ball so well and swinging so well. I don't remember really being that nervous. I'm sure I was nervous, but I got right up on the very first hole and I hit it. I hit it down there, and wedged it up there about 4 feet, 5 feet, and made birdie, and I was off and running. And so I wasn't really that nervous. Uh, but I three putted the second hole, and we were just kind of jockeying. It was a very difficult day. That U.S. Open was a little different because we had heavy rains on Wednesday night, so the scores were very low. Um, going in the last round, there was 24 guys within 4 shots. So it was a much different situation. Most U.S. Opens, the field gets separated. Like last week, there was I think there was like 5 shots between the top 10 guys, 5 or 6 shots. Whereas in this case, it was close. But the course had dried out on that Monday, and it was a very windy day. It was difficult, and Hale had cold topped the shot on number 5 and made a bogey on a par 5, and we were just kind of jockeying it. And then I birdied 9, and he bogeyed 9, so I went from 1 down to 1 up, and we were just kind of jockeying along. And like I said before, I had a 2-shot lead. I made about a 10-footer for birdie on 14, and he made it from about 8 feet on top of me. And he just hung in there. He just kept hanging in there. There was maybe 3 or 4 opportunities where he could have just let it slide away, and I could have had 3 or 4 shot leads. And then number 17. It was blowing dead into the wind, and it was over a lake, and the green was very slopey. And he stood over that. I've timed it before. He stood over that for like 2.5, 3 minutes to try and figure out what to do. And he hit a 6-iron, and it ballooned, and it literally carried the water by about 1.5 yards. And he chipped it up there and made par. But if he hits it in the water or doesn't get that ball up and down, I'm up by 2 with 1 to go, and it's a different deal. So there were plenty of opportunities for. I mean, if you watch the replay, in my view, it's almost a miracle, that he won. But he made the comment. He said, people like Mike Donald, they just can't see themselves winning, and they're afraid to go through the door. And I've thought about that comment a bunch, and in my mind, I dispute it, but maybe he was right. And we ended up having breakfast that day, and I told him, I said, what, you don't have to disparage me anymore, because they asked him what was the difference between people that can win majors and people that can't, and they said, well, it didn't really reference me, but he says, well, people like myself and Jack and Tom Watson, and we go about our business and we get business done. And he said, Mike Donald just used to like to sit around the locker room and tell stories. and it really kind of, aggravated me, because I'm thinking, what, I spent my whole life, trying to be a tour player. And, when I lost my scholarship on playing golf, after my 3rd year of school, I lost my scholarship and I was home delivering flowers. Nobody thought I was going to be a tour player. And, I thought what I accomplished was pretty good, and I put in a lot of effort. And to minimize all my effort and my whatever I did accomplish, down to I like to tell stories in the locker room. It was, but he told me, he said, Mike, he says, the way I look at it is, if you're a champion and you win, you're a champion. And he says, if you don't win, you're not the champion. And I said, well, what if that putt on the last hole from 15 feet had gone in? Then would I have been a champion? And he said, well, that's just the way it works.
Yeah, I don't think describing him as a dick was a strong enough
Yeah.
characterization of. As much as, and I don't want to replay this putt again by Hale Irwin because I can't stand the sight of him running around the green. As a media member, I don't remember him being particularly accommodating to any members of the press. I mean, he was right there with VJ Singh and a couple of others. You mentioned
Hold on
Watson.
one second. Hold on
Yeah.
one. Hey, Francisco! Francisco! Yeah, the guy's got the blower on.
Oh, okay. We can't hear him, so
Okay, I'm with you.
he's okay.
Is it bothering you?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It's working okay. You're outside playing golf? Where are
No,
you?
I was just sitting on the patio, and the guy came with the blower, and he's blowing. So anyway, I'm good.
All right, very good. So I would imagine there wasn't a whole lot of cordial conversation during the course of that 18, 19.
No. I don't think anything was said between the two of us. I mean, there might have been. Yeah, I don't think there was much said. And they made a big deal about Rory and not speaking to Bryson DeChambeau. Well, that's not why you're there. You're not there to make friends. You're there to trying to win a golf tournament.
The money differential is humongous. You mentioned to me that I think, got 110,000 for finishing second in 1990. I believe second place, McIntyre cashed a check over 2 million, which by even today's financial standards would be for almost anybody a life changing score. And you mentioned after that you struggled a little bit. Was it enough money to set you up for a period of time? Or I saw your career earnings were somewhere around $2 million. So I mean, how much of a differential was that compared to the times? Was that enough to make you feel like, okay, hey, you can say whatever you want, Hale Irwin. I got a bag full of money anyway, and I feel pretty good about myself.
Well, for myself, my my father died with $2,000.
Wow.
So I came from a working class family where they worked every day and never saved anything, and didn't have a pension or anything like that. And so I was always frugal. And then what? I never got married. I didn't have kids. So there was I was 40 years old. Still renting an apartment for $700 a month. So I was a saver, and I was always aware that my career was going to be over at some point. And I got to when you grow up and your parents don't have any money, you don't know anybody with any money. And I didn't know anything about the stock market. And I had a friend of mine, Johnny Lapenzina. I was talking about getting into the stock market and tax shelters, and he said, Mike, you can make more money playing golf than the stock market. Just concentrate on what you're doing. And it was good advice at the time because the stock market crash came, and I saw some of the other pros go broke in '87 when the market crashed. But I was fortunate enough to play with Jack Welch, the guy from General Electric, at the '90 AT&T, and we became friends and played. And over the next couple of years, played several times at down here at Seminole and different places. And one day he said to me, he says, Mike, have you got any money saved up? And I said, yeah, I've got money saved up. And he said, well, do yourself a favor, buy 10 of the biggest companies and just put them away for 10 years. And but you have to have some equities. And I didn't know any. Temporarily lost. I got there with a good story, so hopefully we'll be able to get it back. He's outside there getting the usual one of my contention. I think all way to get rich, you have to set yourself up for life. It would be to figure out a way to go ahead and find a software for a leaf, which I never understood exactly what the purpose of that whole thing was. Because all they do is blow the data street into your yard. And let's see, I'm looking at that. Here. I'm not really straight on that. So we are going to be talking to Scott Hastings on basketball. Make our way. It's almost like navigating the golf. I think that the U.S. Open this year, which right up there with what you were saying, and any additional
Or now the Open, where you literally need a machete to get out of it. Okay, I think we're back. At least our sound is all right, but we have temporarily lost Mike Donald here in the middle of what. And this is the kind of thing that we try to do here on Conversations, the middle of a very good story, which very unfortunate that that's taken place. But stick with us. I do want to mention that if you're in the Boca area, Delray Beach area, one of our fine sponsors here on Bleacher Brothers is Deck 84, Bert Rappaport's fine restaurant, a place that you can still access by boat. You can cruise a boat up there. It's one of the few places you can do that anymore in South Florida. And they have great food and drink and all kinds of good stuff. So you'll enjoy that immensely, and great, great place. We're very happy to have them on board. Big supporters of FAU and everything that goes on there, which Garen is a big part of. Maybe we can bring Garen back in here. Oh, there's
Now
Mike.
I'm
Okay.
back with you.
Okay, good, Michael. Yeah, you were talking about. Well, I'm glad you were able to make a score. Thank goodness for General Electric. As
Well, you know what? You know what? It just makes you aware that you know what, you get lucky in life. You know, things happen for you. And you know, if I hadn't met Jack Welch, you know, my parents would have been saying, "Hey, you know, save your money, save your money."
yeah,
And so, you know what? You can't know what you don't know. And I would have never gotten into the stock market if it hadn't been the CEO of General Electric telling me to do it.
unbelievable
And
stuff.
so, yeah,
Yeah.
so you know, you get lucky.
What do you think about what's going on in golf today? Do you have any thoughts on the whole thing with the Live Tour? I mean, talk about getting lucky. It does seem like it's softened some of these guys up, like the 3 rounds and the lack of necessity. I mean, none of these guys are going broke that are at the top of the game that were lured away. It seemed like they were trying to recruit a lot of European guys that may be at the tail end of their career, although they did get some of the top names involved, including Brooks Koepka, who had an incredible competitive spirit and won a couple of U.S. Opens himself. What did you make of all of that, and where do you see the game going, Mike?
You know, it's very interesting. You know, the commissioner just announced that he's stepping down. Uh, but you know, the live. You know, I can't understand. You know, I'll never be able to understand. You know, Phil Mickelson in 1996, we tried to make some changes with the tour, and I remember Mickelson was only like in his third year, and I remember him saying, "Hey guys, don't rock the boat." You know, and he was making $1 million a year as a 25-year-old kid, and he didn't want to rock the boat. And then after 30 years of you know making millions and millions and Presidents Cups and Ryder Cups, and you know, then all of a sudden he's bitter, and you know you know only he can answer the question. But he was getting $20 million a year in endorsements, so he got $200 million. But you know he would be announcing TV right now. You know he'd be on NBC doing the U.S. Open, and they'd be paying him $10 million a year to do that.
Yeah,
But now he's persona non grata. So, but you know, if you take a guy like Harold Varner and they say, hey, we're going to give you 15 or $20 million, you got to go set your family up. But I definitely think it's made people like Cam Smith. You know, they say he got $100 million. Well, how hard are you going to practice if you got $100 million?
sure.
You know, how your sense of urgency. So there's something called the edge. You know, it's like you lose an edge and you don't even know what the edge is. But I was with Arnold Palmer one time, and he told me, he said the worst thing that ever happened to him was he won the U.S. Open in 1960. And he said he lost his edge for the U.S. Open, and he ended up losing three playoffs after that. You know, he lost a big lead in '66, uh, and but you know, he said he lost his edge, and he couldn't really define it. But you know, I think when you go get all that money and you got 3 round events, shotgun starts, you know, you're getting 125,000 no matter what you shoot. I just don't know how hard and how desperate you can be when you go out to that driving range every day. And I know if you asked each and every one of them, they'd say they're working as hard as they can, but I just don't think they realize that there's a few people that can get that money and it's not going to affect them. and they're superstars or superstar. But the majority of people, when they get that money, they're going to become soft. And then
Well,
you're gonna prepare yourself playing live, and then all of a sudden you're going to show up for a major, and then you're going to turn it on. Obviously Hatton played great, and but I just don't like where the tour has gone. When I was on the policy board for 4 years, and I always fought. Norman wanted to play less events, and I said, you know what, you got to play 15 just like the rest of us, and we have to support the other events. So if you have 8 events where there's no cut, and you only got 70 guys, those guys aren't going to go play. They're not going to go play Hartford. They're not going to go play Dallas. And so you got half the fields are going to be awful. And then you're going to end up losing sponsors like, Wells Fargo and Honda. And so I don't know. For me, it's always about play the most number of players and give the most players an opportunity. And now they're going from 125 exempt players down to 100. So if you've got a young kid who's 19, 20 years old and aspiring to play the tour, his opportunities just went down.
how tough is the Q school in qualifying for these events, and does it remain with the same degree of difficulty?
Well, I mean, it's super, super difficult. And, when it comes down to it, you're going to get to that last day, 4 rounds. It used to be 6, but now it's 4 or 5. But with 9 holes to go, if you shoot 33 the last 9 holes, you're probably going to make it. And if you shoot 38, you're probably going to miss. And I was talking to Paul. It's very interesting. I was talking to Paul Stankowski. This is how fragile the game is. He was saying that his first year he went to his school, he was at the second stage. He's in a playoff, 4 for 2. The one guy had birdied, the other guy had made a bogey, so it was 2 for 1. And the other guy hit a bunker shot, and he said it was perfect, and it was rolling right at the hole, and it came up 1 inch short. And he said, if that putt had gone 1 more inch further, I would have been out, and I wouldn't have gotten on my tour card. And he says, it turns out it came up 1 inch short. And he says, I beat the guy on the next hole, and then I got my tour card at the finals. And he says, if that would have gone 1 more inch further, I might have never gotten my card. I'd have had to wait another year. Who knows what I would have done the next year. And that's how fragile it can be for a middle of the. Now it's going to be not, but even like Mike Reed and Peter Jacobson, they made it through the qualifying school on the number. 1 shot higher, you're out.
Yeah. Equipment has changed dramatically in a lot of sports. Tennis, we used to see guys with wood rackets, and you had that funny thing that you tried to keep the thing from warping that you used to have to put around it, this bracket. And now, they've gone through a variety of changes so that even the women are hitting the ball 120 miles an hour off the serve. Certainly, golf equipment has evolved. And I was watching an interview with Jack Nicklaus the other day, and they had a clip from Jack, and he was saying the players today would be better off if they were working with the old stuff because they would work a lot harder. What's your feeling about the way the game has changed in that regard?
Well, yesterday I played golf with a kid who's going to be a junior in high school. He's one of the top 50 juniors in the country. And, he's hitting the ball. I'm 70, but I don't hit it that much shorter than I did, when I was playing with the wooden clubs.
Uh-huh.
And, he's hitting the ball 60 yards, 60 yards past me. And he's swinging so hard. And then he's got his quad machine, next to the ball every hole, hitting his iron shots, going to, get the analysis of the shot. I mean, it's just such a weird thing. But I talked to a fella, John Wood. He used to make wooden clubs. And he said, the reason you see so many good young players today is because you don't have to learn as much. When you used to have a little wooden club and a blotted ball, and the ball would duck hook, and if you now they take out an 8-iron and hit as hard as they can because the ball aerodynamically goes through the wind, whereas the ball used to upshoot. And if you hit an 8-iron as hard as you could into a 15-mile-an-hour wind, it'd come up 20 yards short. So you had to know how to flight the ball, take the spin off, and so there was more to learn. So it's an easier game, but as Don January said, It's a different game, but it's still a great game.
Is the U.S. Open the most difficult? Which show would you characterize? Obviously, the Masters seems to carry the most prestige. PGA, I don't know, might does that rank fourth among the majors? How would you rank the four majors in terms of the accolades that should go along with winning?
It's interesting because I think it's changed over the last 40 years. When Arnold and Jack, it was always the U.S. Open. The U.S. Open was the most important tournament, but I think it shifted. And the British Open used to be maybe third, but the British Open is now the game. When I was during my career, we had 5 or 6 international players. Now, I remember at Doral a few years ago, they had 70 guys playing, and there was only 26 Americans.
Wow!
So it's become such an international game that the British Open has really picked up a lot of prestige, and I think the U.S. Open for some. But the thing with the Masters is, if you get to go back every year for the rest of your life, and you get to go to that Masters dinner, and so it's not it's not where it ends. You always know where you're going. I mean, my friend Buddy Alexander, he won the U.S. Amateur, and he gets to go back to the Masters every year. They invite him, and he's there, and it's pretty cool to be able to take your wife and your family to the Masters every year, and hang out with the guys, and so maybe that's one of the reasons the Masters is picked up. I mean, obviously the PGA's fourth, but I'm a little bit attached to the U.S. Open, so the U.S. Open would be number one for me.
No doubt, a great story. All right, the best you ever played with, and of course you're around late '80s, early '90s on the PGA Tour. You dabbled a little bit with what was then known as a Senior Tour, now the Champions Tour. Tiger Woods, obviously, what would be a standout there. You mentioned Big Jack, Arnie Palmer. Who would you? How would you rank your top 5 all time if you were asked to do so?
During my era, the
Yeah,
top 5,
or any era for that matter. But yeah,
listen, you can't. I guess Jack and Tiger are one. Both won. Different eras, different game. People will argue that the competition's harder now, and I used to say, well, Jack used to beat guys that won multiple majors. He beat Arnold, who won 8. He beat Tom, or 8 or 9. He beat Watson, who had 8. He beat Trevino, who had 6. He was beating a lot of people who had multiple majors, whereas Tiger was beating. He had Ernie Els, who had 2 for a long time, and he ended up with 4. And he had, when he was winning his majors, he had what's his name, Phil, but he had 4, and then he got the 5th, late. But there was really nobody else with 2, and there was nobody in the 20s there for a while who had 1, besides Tiger. So, for me, my era, I got to go, Jack, and Tiger obviously is right there with him. And then the next greatest players after that, I mean, I think you got to put Snead and Hogan. But we had fabulous players, during my era. I'll tell you who the best ball striker I ever saw was Fred Couples. I mean, he could do more with a golf ball, and he could hit long. He had great touch around the greens, and he was a great player. And he and I were very close friends for a long time. And I'm going to say this. I just don't think he had the mental toughness that some of the other guys had, but he was by far. I watched a video the other day where Johnny Miller said, in 5 years he never saw Fred Couples hit a shot that wasn't solid. I mean, he always hit the ball beautifully.
His swing was very much, I guess, like the personality that you just characterized, where he was just such an easygoing guy. I don't know. I mean, in any sport, I don't know that I've ever seen a guy whose stroke was as casual and yet effective as Freddie Couples.
Well, it's funny, when he first came out, he had a real strong grip, and he was across the line, and really powerful and speedy. And everybody say, "Oh, look at that swing! It's not very good." And then all of a sudden, he started beating everybody, And then everybody's like, that's the swing to copy, you know? And all of a sudden it's like, nobody swings like Freddie. But when he first came out, it was like, it was criticized. So it's kind of funny how perceptions change.
Yeah, no, I watching him. He doesn't even look like he's swinging hard, and then all of a sudden, you see the ball going some monster distance, and it's almost like watching golf today, where you're seeing somebody on a 220-yard shot taking out a 7-iron, and you're thinking, that would be a sledgehammer for me. Never mind a driver. I don't think I'd be able to hit the ball that far, but he really did. Of all the people we've seen in baseball, tennis, which involves any kind of a swing like that, Freddie Couples made it look so absolutely effortless. All right, one final thing, Mike. I appreciate you coming on the show, but and you sort of hinted at this. Of all the things, what people talk about, lessons that you take away from any game that people participate in. What would you say would be the single greatest thing that you took away from all of your experiences in golf, including finishing a real tough, hard nosed second in that 1990 U.S. Open at Medina?
Well, I talk to young kids a lot, and I actually had a young kid. This is going to take about a minute to tell the story, but there was a
Yeah.
kid named David Gossett. He was one of the Fab Five kids, and he was going to the University of Texas. He was a high school senior, and I happened to be in Memphis. We were on the putting green alone, and he's obviously a fabulous player. And 3 weeks later, he actually played in the Memphis tournament as a senior in high school and shot 67 the first day. And he went on to win the U.S. Amateur. But I remember telling him, you know, just take your time. Don't try to become too good. Don't try too hard. Don't go changing things. Don't go to teachers and let you mess you up. And the kid went to Texas, played great, won the U.S. Amateur, shot 59 at a qualifying school, won a tournament. And in 2005, we were on a bus together in Panama City, Panama. And I sat down next to him, and he said to me, he said, Mike, I think about you every day. And I said, really, why is that? And he said, we were on the putting green in Memphis when I was a senior in high school, and you told me just to take my time and don't take lessons, don't let anybody mess up my game. And he said, you know what, I didn't listen to you. And he said, I went and saw some teachers, and they messed me up. And so Jeff Ogilvy, who won the U.S. Open, they asked him what his biggest regret is, and he said, I wish I hadn't tried to get better. He said, you know what? Every time you try to get better, you mess things up. And he said, you just get better by playing more golf, getting more experience, and just mosey along. And you're going to go up, and you're going to go down, and you're going to go up, and you're going to go down. And just don't let the downs, get you too far down. But for my career, I played 550 tournaments, and I missed 251 cuts. So when you think about that, I spent 251 weekends, disappointed, miserable, had spent money, lost money for the week. And, but you know what? That Stankowski, I was telling you the story. In 96, he missed the first 7 cuts of the year. And then he went and played a web.com event in Louisiana, and he won. And then the next week he came back to the tour in Atlanta, and he won. And then the next week he was on the putting green at Augusta National. And so it just goes to show you go in streaks. But when you play golf, in golf, when you play good, play really good. That's the key.
How stressful is people always talk about the mental aspect of any sport, but how stressful is it, and how difficult is it? Now you're an easygoing guy, Mike. I've known you a long time, and you, as you said, I mean, you experienced many, many ups and downs, but how difficult is that to control when things are going wrong? And obviously, there are many people that are much better at it than others. But how tough is it to kind of rein that in and not let your emotions or whatever nerves are impacting you get the better of you?
Well, people say just stay positive. You know what? We're all human beings. We all succumb to, disappointment. We all succumb to expectations. But, people always talk about this sports psychology.
Yeah.
My whole thing in sports psychology is it all boils down to just keep trying. You just got to keep trying. You got to hang in there and just keep trying. And when you've had a tough stretch. So in 1988, I had missed 6 cuts in a row. I was losing my card. I was 150th on the money list. And I called Gardner Dickinson up and said, can I see you? And he said, yeah, I'll arrange for you to play a practice round at a Champions Tour event. So we were in Atlanta. I took a lesson. And 2 weeks later, I birdied 8 out of the last 9 holes and finished 5th. And now if I don't birdie those 8 out of 9 holes and don't keep my card, then 1989 doesn't ever happen. And I won a tournament that year and finished 22nd on the money list. And the next year, I was my open year. So if I don't have that 9 holes in 88, I'm gone. And if Gardner Dickinson hadn't have seen me, I would have been gone. If the Champions Tour hadn't let me play a practice round, I would have been gone. So a lot of it's luck and circumstances, and you get lucky breaks along the way.
Are you still hustling people out there? I mean,
no, I played 9 holes. I played 9 holes after 6 o'clock about 3 days a week, and that's about it.
So you haven't shown up as a ringer and gotten involved in some very high pricey Nassau's?
Well, there's not too many people are going to recognize me with my new look.
Yeah, I mean, it is a departure from the button-down Mike Donald that we saw with the short black hair in 1990 at Medina. But I would imagine you could get away with murder in terms of just going out there and challenging the top guy at any club.
You know what? I'm being a little immodest, but I still play okay. And I still play the back tees. I haven't moved up. I'm almost 70 years old, and I still go to the back of the golf course. And I still do okay.
Best shot you ever hit?
Ooh, best shot I ever hit. You know what? The best shot I ever hit was probably on the 17th hole in the playoff against Taylor when it was windy, and I hit a 5-iron up there about 12 feet right of the hole, and it was the circumstances and the situation. Unfortunately, the putt broke about 12 inches, and it rolled right over the top edge, and I didn't make it. But I mean, it was such a beautiful golf shot.
All right, and one final thing. As and enjoying the stories and a recap of virtually everything that you've talked about here on the show. But yeah, I mean, if you had to do it all again, what would you do anything differently?
I wish I would have had the wherewithal to not go down the bad path I went after the Open and chasing that golf swing that I had going. And truth be told, I think I would have had a much longer career, and I would have played. I might have even gone into the senior tour if the U.S. Open had never happened, because I totally tried to change the way I played, and that's my only regret. I've lived in an incredible life. I've played with billionaires. I've played with, I played in the last group at a Masters. I played in the last group at a U.S. Open. This is I'm saying. So I think I'm probably the only player in the history of golf that led after my first U.S. Open round and after my first Masters round. So to get into a tournament.
Do you still have the course record at Augusta?
You know what? Greg Norman shot 63 in the first round, but I think there's only 6 of us that have shot 64 or lower in the first round. And I still have the record for a first-year player in the first round, and I have the record for the biggest collapse. And from
round 1 to 2.
Well, I went 60. I was 64-82, and actually there was somebody in there. Sandy Lyle one year shot 69-87. No, 69-86. He came up one shot short of me. But if you go to the website, the Masters website, and look up the records, it's in there. It's the greatest differential, and from good to bad, and I've got it.
Well, you certainly experienced a lot of ups and downs, but thank goodness almost all of it since has been ups. Remarkable story. Great parallel with this JJ Spawn thing, although he ended up in the winner's circle and you were a shot short there on a 19-hole sudden death situation in the U.S. Open in 1990. And as you said to me, Mike Donald, and it's been a pleasure having you on the show, can you believe that was 35 years ago? That's an amazing thing to think about.
I was talking to a guy the other day, and we were watching the Open, and I had mentioned that I finished second in it, and he said, "What year?" And I said, "90." And the guy was old. And he says, "I wasn't even born," and I'm like, it's like, I mean, if you think about it, JJ Spawn was just born the year after.
Wow.
I mean, so if you think about it, that's the guy in 1954, for me, 35 years before I played well, would have been, 1954.
Wow,
It's
unbelievable. Great
crazy.
story, yeah. Hey, we wish you all the best. I'm so happy we were able to catch up with you. I couldn't help but think of you when I saw what JJ Spawn was doing and this monumental comeback. And you thought, well, geez, what if this guy falls a stroke short? I still hate Hale Irwin like poison. I'm glad you sent him that letter. And I'm glad you're doing well. Thanks so much for being with us here on Conversations.
Well, Jeff, it's great to see you doing well. And you know what? You've had a great long career, and you've been all over the place. But you're literally, uh, not to overstate it, you're a legend in South Florida radio. I put you right up there with Neil Rogers.
Unfortunately, he's been 6 feet under for a while. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, you don't want to be him.
I'm still in
So,
the
but
right
anyway,
frame.
you're a legend, and I appreciate your friendship, and all the best to you.
Always a pleasure. Mike Donald, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for being with us and taking the time. We weren't able to make the connection with Scott Hastings, unfortunately, so we didn't get our NBA conversation here. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring you Scott at a future time. Coming up in the future, we have a lot of good people lined up on the show. So stick with us here. Conversations every week on Bleacher Brothers. Our thanks to Garen. Garen, pop yourself back in here because we want to thank you personally for producing the program today. And we did have our share of hiccups on the show. So nice job there. I don't know if I would have been able to recover as quickly without you behind the scenes, my friend. So thanks so much. And when can we catch some of your work? The NASCAR show, I understand, is a big hit. Our good friend Chris Visser is a huge fan and advocate of what you're doing there. And I know you're going to be all over FAU when the sports schedule resumes there in the football season.
Yeah, Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock, NASCAR lap by lap. Tonight we have Matt Weaver, a journalist, joining, and we've had previous drivers, uh, team members, just people like that join, just a recap of the previous race and a look ahead at the next weekend.
All right, sounds good, my friend. Thank you so much for helping me out today. Really needed it, as it turned out, and always appreciate your fine efforts. That's Garen, and he does a great job. That NASCAR show is top notch. If you're a fan of NASCAR racing, he's all over it with his coverage, and I'm glad you guys are plugged into Bleacher Brothers. A lot of great stuff coming up on the horizon there, courtesy of our man AJ Johnson, and of course Chris Visser working in there behind the scenes. Pleasure catching up with Mike Donald. Pleasure catching up with you guys. And thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you on the next edition